Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right in, using the source material itself to try and make sense of the incredibly tangled and, let's be honest, pretty controversial relationship between media and politics in India. So, let's get into it. We're talking about a media world where, according to our sources, that line between real journalism and just government messaging, it gets super blurry, to the point where some news channels basically become giant megaphones for the official story. And it's not just that. At the very same time, you've got this massive crisis of misinformation. We're talking about an absolute flood of deceptive content that has very real consequences. It's fueling arguments, dividing communities, and just stirring up trouble. So the big question is, how did we even get here? This is one of the world's biggest, most vibrant democracies. In this explainer, we're going to follow the breadcrumbs, look at the influence, the bias, and the people who are fighting back for the truth in what is for sure a really complex situation. Okay, so first things first. Section 1, India's media maze. To really get a grip on all this, we've got to know who the players are. Who's actually making the news and getting it out there. Well, India's media scene today is this wild mix of old and new. You've got your traditional newspapers and TV channels, the ones that have been around forever, but now they're all competing with this super fast, anything-goes world of social media. And that digital side, it has totally changed the game. All right, now for Section 2, the fake news epidemic. Let's dive into one of the biggest problems poisoning this whole ecosystem, the absolute explosion of fake news. And listen, this goes way beyond just a catchy, misleading headline. We're talking about content that is literally manufactured to make you angry or scared. The source material we looked at gives some pretty chilling examples of how viral videos are used to stir up fear and hate. Take this one, for instance. A video just blew up online, and the caption? It was written specifically to spark conflict between different communities. But here's the crazy part. When fact-checkers looked into it, the truth was, well, disturbing. The whole thing didn't even happen in India. It wasn't even on the same continent. The video was actually from Guatemala. Someone just grabbed it, slapped a totally false, explosive story on it, and aimed it right at an Indian audience. And it's not a one-off thing. Here's another one. This video was designed to pour gasoline on the fire of political rivalries down in the state of Kerala. It was super graphic, really shocking, and it was passed around as proof of just how brutal things were getting. And you guessed it, the real story was a world away, literally. This wasn't politics in India. It was gang violence in Mexico. They just took this raw footage, stripped away all the real context, and used it to fuel a completely unrelated political fight back in India. Incredible, right? Okay, Section 3, bias and state control. So it's not always about totally fake videos. There's something more subtle going on too, deep-seated bias and government influence. This is where the story gets shaped not just by lies, but by what gets covered, what gets ignored, and frankly, who gets to tell the story in the first place. A really stark example of this comes from the reporting on Kashmir right after the government changed its special status under Article 370. It's like the Indian media and the international media were reporting on two completely different planets. The local reports mostly stressed that everything was normal, often echoing the government's line. But the global coverage, it was all about massive protests, medicine shortages, and huge numbers of people being detained. So you have to ask, how does this happen? Well, the sources lay out a kind of toolkit for applying pressure. One of the big ones is money. If you're a newspaper that's critical of the government, they might just pull all their advertising, which is a huge source of revenue. Then there's the political angle, like when a ruling party officially tells its members to boycott a certain TV channel, effectively trying to ice them out. And then, of course, there's legal pressure. Check this out. In just 1 year, a single corporate group filed 28 defamation lawsuits against different media outlets. 28. A number like that, it sends a message, right? A pretty chilling one if you're a journalist thinking about digging into something sensitive. So, okay, Section 4, the truth detectives. What we've seen so far paints a pretty grim picture of a media landscape that's under a ton of pressure. But, and this is important, it is not a one-sided fight. A new kind of resistance is bubbling up. So who is fighting back? With all this misinformation and pressure building up, a whole new front has opened up in this battle for what's true. And interestingly, it's not really happening in the huge old-school newsrooms. It's happening in these smaller, quicker, online-only outfits. Our sources highlight the rise of these independent truth detectives, a great example being the team at altnews.in. What they do is basically digital detective work. It's painstaking stuff. They'll break down a suspicious video frame by frame, run image searches on tiny details, all to trace these fake stories back to where they actually came from and show everyone how the trick was done. Now for Section 5, decoding media's hidden language. It's one thing to debunk a single fake video, but what about the bigger picture? Researchers are now trying to decode the hidden language of media bias itself. They're using technology to go beyond just one story and spot the massive patterns that you or I would probably miss. So how do they do it? Well, academics are using this really cool three-step process to measure bias across thousands of articles at once. First, they gather a ton of data, like every article on a certain topic. Then, they use algorithms to sort all that information into key themes. And finally, they analyze how different news outlets talk about those themes when they're speaking to different groups, like the poor versus the middle class. And this table is a perfect example of what they found. It's from research on India's 2016 demonetization policy. You know, when they suddenly banned big currency notes? Look at this. The long lines at banks? The media often framed that positively for the middle class, like it was a patriotic duty. But the fact that the policy was crushing small businesses, that was framed as the government making necessary, tough decisions. See the spin? It reveals a really clear bias. But here's a twist that I find fascinating. The study of media bias has its own bias. When researchers looked at all the academic papers on this topic, they found a huge focus on Western countries. For every 81 studies on the US media, there was only one on India. Think about that. We're trying to understand a global issue, but we're mostly just looking at it from one very specific Western point of view. So, all of this brings us to the million-dollar question. In a world full of spin, what is our role in all of this? What can we actually do? Because yeah, the system might be broken in a lot of ways, but that doesn't mean we're helpless. Look, the big takeaway here is that we all have a part to play. It really starts with us, with becoming smarter, more critical readers and viewers. Don't just swallow the facts. Question the frame they're put in. Ask yourself, who does this story help? What are they not telling me? And you know what? We can also put our support behind those truth detectives who are out there doing the hard work. Because at the end of the day, in this crazy new media maze we're all in, being media literate isn't just a neat skill to have, it's basically a requirement for being a good citizen. This fight for a well-informed society, it's not just for journalists anymore. It's on all of us. And I guess the real question is, are we ready for that?